Hey everyone, thanks for joining. Today I'm speaking with Jason Littlefield. Jason is the co-founder and executive director of Empowered Pathways. Hey Jason, thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So I saw your interview with Carrie and Carter on their podcast like Unsafe Space,
Hmm.
and then I lately you've been putting stuff out with Eric Smith, and I guess you're I don't know if I want to say you're starting to work with him, but you're doing a different version of, you know, for lack of a better term, diversity training, but you also talk about like SEL. So if you can go into a bit of that and talk about a bit about why you started Empowered Pathways, and then we can go from there.
Okay, for sure. And I guess maybe just to kind of clarify
Mhm,
my work with Eric,
mhm,
because you kind of mentioned it there. So I am working with Eric on
mhm,
a couple of different projects. I'm proud to be a part of what Free Black Thought is
mhm,
and what that's going to be. And Eric is also, with the Empowered
mhm.
Pathways team, and so is Xander Keeg. I've really built built this team and looking forward to doing some really good work with this group of people. So Empowered Pathways was, I established it in 2017 as a kind of an alternative. I built it under the model, kind of the field of dreams
Mhm.
idea of build it and they will come, because around 2017 I started to see the shift happening, and from at beginning 2014, I became a social and emotional learning specialist in the public school system, where I began, really began studying human emotion and looking at things like self awareness, self management, relationship skills, social awareness, and responsible decision making. So that's what social and emotional learning is. And around 2017, I started to see the shift moving away from cultivating and fortifying the individual to this new, the successor ideology, as I've heard it referred to. So I established Empowered Pathways as a different approach, for one day that the things would be so on the surface that it was obvious what we were doing.
Okay. When you mentioned that, I'm just going to give you a bit of an anecdote. I used to work for government up in northern Canada,
Okay.
and when I first started working there, and it's moving to an Inuit community, so it's something I hadn't experienced, and so all new employees were made to take a cultural, and I was in the pilot program. So I started with them in 2014, and that was the first year they'd done it. So it was like a cultural sensitivity training, and then also to give people more of an idea about Inuit communities and Inuit life. Now, part of it was really well done. They had this gentleman who was a PhD in archaeology who'd lived up in northern Canada for about 30 years, but he was a little dry. It was like listening to someone read a textbook.
Hmm.
But still, I mean, it was informative, and we had Inuit people from the community in the meeting as well, and explaining things a little bit more in depth. But then there was a diversity trainer, and okay, like I said, we were all new employees, so none of us really knew each other. And the two people I was sitting beside, I mean, we gave ourselves some shocked looks. I remember one thing he said. He was talking about a book. I can't even remember the name of the book. And the guy who wrote it, he said, "Well, it was something Cohen." And he said, "Well, this person's name is blah 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 Cohen, and his first name is Jewish, and his last name is Jewish, so he's twice Jewish." And this guy wrote about how in Hitler's mind, Hitler thought he was doing right, so because he's a Jewish person, he can get away with it. I'm just sitting here like, this guy's teaching us diversity, and I mean, I was just like, I mean, we were just shocked. Like, it just, okay, just stating that someone is Jewish is not wrong in and of itself, but just, oh, because of his name, this and that, and so he can get away with saying that, like, you know, in my mind, it was like any reasonable person can say that Hitler himself thought he was doing good, right?
Right.
In his
Right.
worldview, he thought he was doing good, and that's I mean, I understand that argument, but just to force it on, and we had to give
Yeah.
in a, force it like on, so we had to give in an assessment of this after we were done because they wanted to know how it went. And that was one of the things I put. Like I said, this guy was, just saying that. And after that, I mean, he loses you. Like, how is this guy supposed to be teaching us how to be respectful and diverse and all this when he starts off on that path?
Yeah.
I mean, there were a couple other things. Like, he made factual errors, and he made, like, he was talking about the Crusades. He said, "Oh, there's only a couple of Crusades." I'm like, "No, there was way more than a couple of Crusades."
Right. Yeah.
So
I used to have to facilitate some of these trainings. And one time somebody raised their hand. Luckily, it wasn't me at the front, but one of my co-presenters, he asked, he was like, "Isn't this stereotyping?" And I was in the back, and in my head, I was like, "Yes, and thank you for not asking me that." And so I've been facilitating and attending these trainings since around 2017. And one of my, I heard you mention the feedback that you had to give. The feedback that I gave 3 years ago, they said, "What should our next steps be?" And I said, we need to, this was 3 years ago. I said, we need to have a discussion to see if critical race theory is the best approach for dealing with issues of race and racism. And we never had that conversation because, I was like, this is really going to be a really big issue, and it's causing a lot of division and psychological basis for prejudice. So I feel like I was trying to get out in front of it. And that's kind of what Empowered Pathways was, because I created a set of tools and practices and mindsets that in my mind, I was hoping to get out in front of all of this. But, for the past few years, I've just been a one person team that's still been focused on a day job, and focused on parenting and different things like that.
Okay.
And the world didn't look like this. There wasn't an obvious need for something else. There wasn't the awareness that Western civilization is under attack here. That's what this whole thing is pushing against. So
well, okay, there wasn't an awareness of it, but okay, and again, maybe this is because I use the analogy of a frog thrown in a pot of boiling water. Like, I was away from North America from 2002 to 2014, so the start of 2014 is when I got back, and I started seeing all this stuff, and I'm speaking to my friends. They're like, "Yeah, whatever, that's just normal," and I'm like, "No, it's not."
right.
So I mean, like, I noticed it right away, and then at the end of 2014, when I went up north, one of the things I noticed immediately, because small community, you could go to the local bar, and if you saw the cars in the parking lot, you knew who was inside. It was like that tiny. So, but it was so I'd speak with the social workers, I'd speak with the people who worked with the health department and things like that, and all the people coming up and working on this. It was emphasis on victimhood. It was everything was done about how the Inuit were victimized, and I don't want to take away from all the awful stuff that was done, but there was nothing done about how to get over that. Now it was all focused on, okay, you're an alcoholic. Well, that's not your fault. That's the fault of white people. That's the fault of the colonizers. That's the fault of the missionaries bringing alcohol. And there is a lot of truth to that, but that doesn't help the person who's an alcoholic right then and there to get over that. So, like, when you're talking about empowerment, and I mean, and they would use the terms empowerment and things like that as well, right? But
see, they use both terms.
Yeah.
They get to use step on both sides of the philosophical discussion.
So, I mean, how do you work with something like that? Like, especially with kids, like, how do you get them out of a victim mindset to think, okay, yes, bad things have happened, but this is how I'm going to overcome them?
Well, those are the things that we're looking to work on and to do, especially through mindfulness, through metacognition, and explaining the two worldviews. I feel that that's that's kind of the basis for explanation,
Mhm.
is to explain the two different worldviews, is to explain, the classical liberal worldview of the Enlightenment and the individual truth, goodness, and beauty, and then the other, whatever this. I don't know what historians will call this, what is shaping place right now, but it's essentially kind of postmodernism, neo-Marxism, whatever it is in those realms, and explain that this worldview perpetuates individuals as either an oppressor or an oppressed, and we're reduced to that. So you can either operate in this worldview, or there's a way to cultivate and fortify the individual. And if that's the route that you choose to be empowered, well, then we will uh, obviously look at metacognition. What are your thinking processes? I heard you mention Eric. So Eric talks, with his with the empowerment theory, it talks about the intrapersonal, the interactional, and the behavioral. So really look at what is happening inside our own thinking processes. What are we thinking about ourselves? What are we thinking about other people? Do we feel that, a young person, do you believe that you are in this perpetual state of either being an oppressor or being oppressed? Or do you feel that you are a unique person, that it odds are, if you work hard and work on developing yourself, you, you will end up being something. You'll get to pursue your own well-being. So really laying out that choice for young people, because right now I don't think they realize that there's a choice. There's a dominant worldview being placed on them, and the reaction to that is our brains are wired to accept the culture that is placed upon us. So we're placing this culture on these young people, and they assume that it's true. They assume that what the trusted adult saying is real, when essentially the worldview that is being projected right now is not. Uh, I want to say not real, but obviously it's real because it's happening right here.
But
It's not beneficial to
mm,
humankind.
but I mean, okay, like again, these are just things I've been noticing. It's people are looking for more and more ways or different ways to make themselves a victim. Like, okay, take Demi Lovato just came out recently as demisexual or non-binary or something like that. It's okay. I don't know anything about her. I know she's an artist and singer, but it's like we've given victimhood so much currency.
Yeah, and I think I may be totally wrong
Mhm.
on demisexual, but
Mhm.
I believe I heard somebody explain it in the distance, and again, I may be completely wrong
Mhm.
here, but I heard it's that you prefer sexual relationships to people that you have an emotional connection with. I
I
don't know if, and I was like, oh, that's that. I thought that was the normal
yeah.
process. So now normal, quote unquote, normal is an oppressed. So it's this endless cycle of pursuing and chasing and grabbing hold of victimhood,
Okay,
like you said.
yeah, but now, okay, when you had the whole I don't want to call it, well, I guess you can say empowerment or whatever, but the self-esteem thing, right? Like you can be whatever you want, which I don't think it's a bad thing to tell kids you can be what you want. But I don't know if they're telling kids, well, you can be what you want if you work hard. Like and realistically, like if there's a kid who's not that tall and they're not going to grow, they're not going to grow up to be over 6 feet or 6'5" or whatever, and that kid wants to be a professional NBA player or professional basketball player. So with like, is that kind of tying in with the victimhood thing? So like, you can tell a kid, okay, you can be whatever you want, and it turns out that kid's not good at basketball. So does that
It
deflate the self esteem and that kind of thing, or?
Uh, yes, and so what we're seeing, self-esteem, inflating people's self-esteem is not a healthy
Mm.
idea. Uh, giving giving them tools for like self-improvement and resilience, and I'm kind of blanking here, but inflating self-esteem is setting people up for failure. In fact, there was a big self-esteem movement in the mid to late 90s. I've been in education, been a public educator for the past 21 years, and even prior to that, I worked in with elementary students when I was a college student. So I started to notice the self-esteem movement, of, oh, you're so great and you're so special, to these kids. You're smart,
Mm.
just really boosting them up. And that was the same time period of the everybody gets a trophy.
Yeah.
So, and I began thinking, I was like, wow, it's like this generation is being socially engineered in a detrimental way. And then we see where this generation is now. This is the generation that hates Western civilization and that is leading the charge of the with the successor ideology. So self-esteem is boosting people's self-esteem is not a positive practice.
Yeah. Okay. I mean,
And it does feed into the victimhood. So
yeah.
boosting the self-esteem and then setting people up for fit, like it does. It's the perfect feed for that, like you were hinting at.
Okay. I mean, okay. Just going back to when okay, trying to remember when I was a little kid, and I had teachers who they pushed us,
Mm-hmm.
and if they saw potential in a kid, like like I had teachers who pushed me and said, okay, you know what, you can do this if you put the work in. It was always put the work in and study and do work hard. So I mean, there's got to be a way to give a kid a self-esteem and make them feel proud of something. Like not everyone's going to be good in wood shop. Not everyone's going to be good in like whatever, if you take a home ec course and you can't, you burn water type of thing, right? Like I the way I'm looking at it is they're not giving the kids the tools to get that self-esteem themselves. They're just saying, here, you're perfect the way you are. And you know if you're telling someone they're perfect the way they are, it doesn't leave any room for self-improvement.
That doesn't leave any room for self-improvement, self-development, and it also doesn't leave room for changing. You know, if I'm accepted, because this is the way that I am, maybe I don't want to change.
Yeah.
So there's also no room for that. And in schools now, we don't really teach and push that message of work hard, be a good person, because it goes, that is counter to the modern narrative, because work hard and be a good person is considered upholding white supremacy attitude. That's not my take. Just so you know, that's not my take. But that's the facts of what educators are being taught, and then the practices that they are doing, because they believe that somebody is telling them truth and what is real,
Mm.
and most educators have a really good heart and want what's really best, but we're using ineffective tools.
Okay, on that, so someone who's gone through and they've been a teacher for, let's say, 10 years or 15 years, and this stuff starts coming in. Now, they could be a very dedicated teacher, they want to do it. Like, are teachers, I mean, obviously I'm asking to read minds here a little bit, but are teachers doing this because they're worried, or I just got to toe the line, otherwise I might lose my job? Or are they buying it whole hog?
All of the above,
Mm.
different different ones. And I've seen and encountered all of the above, and I was once in the position to where I took the stance of I just gonna hold the line and do what I'm told and try to have conversations and open dialogue along the way. But after, I would say, 3 years of not having the conversations about we really need to look at our professional practices and their impact on the social and emotional well-being of human beings. After not having that conversation, and even I started going to people, on an individual basis around 2018, noticing that, hey, these trainings that we are going to and the way that we are talking about race, if you look at the philosophical foundings, it's rooted in Marxism, and it's not rooted in liberalism. Like this is where the divide is, and because of that, this is creating the societal chaos and turmoil and division. This these practices that we're doing. So after kind of being pushed to the outside for saying some of these things and waiting for conversation to happen, and it never did, that's when I stepped out. 19 days ago, I ended, at least on hold, my 21-year career as a public educator, because the conversations within the field didn't happen. So now I'm hoping to step out of the field and work with some amazing people to hopefully have a broader influence and impact on the K-12 system, and also corporate trainings. Everybody that's having these diversity, equity, and inclusion workshops, I hope to influence and counter what is happening, because none of those, actually, I can't say none,
Mhm.
but at least none that I've attended, have heard of, are promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion in ways that intentionally cultivate and fortify the individual and strategically find ways to increase societal cooperation.
Okay, so on this, like you'd mentioned the social and emotional learning, and some of these things are terms. Like I said, I'm an IT geek. Like
Right, right.
and so I just started hearing about a lot of these things, and like I didn't, critical pedagogy and all this stuff. Like, I mean, I just fell into it because, I mean, honestly, I think I've mentioned this a few times. Like, I only got into it. I only got into reading about this stuff because I was being called a white supremacist for criticizing Islam. And it's just like, okay, where does that come from? And that's
Yeah.
all I wanted to know. So, if you wouldn't mind going in a bit about like how you're doing it as opposed to what we were talking about just now, like what we've been talking about for the last little bit.
Okay. Well, so the status quo, the orthodox social and emotional learning (SEL), as of December of 2020, shifted its definition and shifted its focus to be a lever for equity and social justice. Which, on the surface, those sound like good ideas, but when we talk about equity, when school districts and systems are talking about equity, the idea that they're pushing is equal outcomes. Even the school district that I've worked in for the past 7 years, one of their top priorities is pushing this idea of equal outcomes. And that's, to me, that's dangerous to push those ideas in the culture, because the culture is the dress rehearsal for the political, and I don't really like to get political, but when it's essentially communism versus liberalism, maybe it's time for people to get political or philosophical on those. So Castle, which is the national SEL organization, they are now transforming this idea of SEL as a lever for equity and social justice. And I'll say 99% of the school systems that do social and emotional learning are using the castle model. So that's what will be happening. And my model, or the Empowered Pathways model, the humanity centered, we center human dignity. And by centering human dignity, what I mean by that is what you see here in front of you, and the voice, what you're interacting with, that is my human. That's the my biology, my conditioned personality. That's the human. And beneath that is the being part. And all beings, in spite of our cultural differences, our racial differences, our geography, in spite of all of those things, all of our beings share the same two things. And that's the desire to avoid suffering and the desire to alleviate suffering. So if we can, if you just think about it, if every person that you interact with and that you see, if we're able to recognize that beneath what we see and are interacting with is something that is just like us, and it wants to avoid suffering, and when it encounters suffering from others, it's going to work to alleviate that.
Okay. Now,
Doing that
mhm.
will eliminate all the harm. And I know that we can't always do that all the time, but that is something that I talk about we should strive for. Rather than seeing each other as this or that, seeing each other as we see the same. And then we can also, through practices that celebrate our common humanity, then we can find issues to where our human sides are connected. We can see each other as we see ourselves. And that whenever those two things are in sync, and we're always practicing seeing each other as we see ourselves, sharing our stories with each other, connecting with each other, then we're creating psychological systems that prevent us from harming the other person.
Okay. Now, I'll play slight devil's advocate here. Now,
For sure.
I'm going to use an example of when I was in college, but I mean, then I'll kind of try to put that into a school, like, K through 12 frame. I was a weird kid. I was a bad student. I got good grades. But a friend of mine was taking a course, and I was taking another course. We were both taking poli-sci courses, and he had a different teacher. I had a big midterm coming up, and his class was about to go in for like his teacher did it, his professor did it slightly differently. They had tests every couple of weeks. So he had one of these tests coming up, and I had my midterm coming up. I said, look, I've studied and whatever, but I just want to see if I'm actually doing all right. So I went into his class, or I went with him to his class. I spoke to his professor. And I said, do you mind if I take your test? And the guy kind of looked at me like I was strange. Like, you want to take my test? Right? But I did it. And then a couple of days later, my buddy comes up to me. He's like, "You're an asshole." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "You got the best grade in the class." Because the teacher held it up. He was like, "Well, he not held it up." He was like, "We had so many, like so many A's, so many B's," and he's like, "And other got an A." But like, now, I'm not saying teachers should do that in K through 12, especially like younger kids. But if they're pushing, to study and pushing kids to work hard, there's got to be some sort of reward at the end as well, right? So like you got the little chart, and kids get little gold stars and whatever. But is there a way to do that where a kid who's not doing well, and it could be for all kinds of reasons? Now, is there a way to say, okay, well, little Billy here's or little Susie here has got the best grade in class, blah blah blah, and you're obviously you want to reward that child for doing well. But is there a way to do that where you're not actually, I mean, you can't control how someone feels, but is there a way to do it where you can mitigate how bad someone might feel if they're like, got the worst grade in class or something like that?
I feel it's the most important thing in that classroom,
Mhm.
in all classrooms, is the relationship that each teacher has with each individual student. And not to not answer
Mhm.
that question, but depending on, it's really never a good idea to publicly do the grade
Mhm.
breakdowns. Uh, that's and maybe because I was always that like C student.
Yeah.
No, but that's rewarding. That is not necessarily what we want to reward. It's always good to reward and acknowledge and praise the effort
Mhm.
that the students are putting in. So if we have a really good relationship with our students and we can see effort they're putting, see how they are working, then we're cultivating their own learning. Because what we would hope to do as an education
Mhm.
profession is to cultivate the individual potential of all students. And a way that we do that is through establishing solid, trusting relationships, and then also really monitoring their progress and their effort and praising them for their efforts and having them reflect on their learning,
Mhm.
so that they can. And that's one way that we can become empowered, is by reflecting on our own learning, reflecting on our experiences, and then we can make those shifts moving forward.
Okay. Now, I went to a lot of different schools. My mom moved just like we didn't move houses, but my mom was like, "Oh, I heard there's a better school here." So from kindergarten to grade 6, I went to 8 different schools.
Okay.
So quite a lot of schools, right? So a lot of different teachers. But one of the teachers I had, I believe, it was third grade, and that's the way she kind of did it. So people got the gold stars or whatever, but on your report cards, like, so let's say there was a kid, you know, the first report card, it was C's and D's, and the next one went up to C's and C pluses type of thing, and it was and she would reward the child for making that effort and making that improvement. So I mean, if you've gone from D's in the first report card to B's by the last one, I mean, you might not be the A student in the classroom, you might not be the one getting the best marks, but I mean, if you start off with A's and you stay with A's, okay, I don't want to say that you haven't improved, but you're kind of static. But a kid that goes from D's to B's, so like, I'm not, again, I'm outsider looking in, but from everything I'm seeing and everything I'm reading, I'm not seeing that they're not rewarding the effort type of thing. They're just, oh, we'll just give them a good mark, we'll pass them and let them go along. Like, shouldn't, I mean, that's where I see some of these things going wrong. Like, if you rewarded that effort, the kid
Mm-hmm.
knows it's the effort that's getting him the reward. It's not just getting that A or B. It's the actual effort that the child put in that's getting the reward.
Well, and so that idea, I'll say from, I may have my years a
Mhm.
little off, but around like 2010
Mhm.
till about 2017, there was a lot of work around growth mindset and developing a growth mindset and rewarding the effort and really noticing and acknowledging the effort. So there was a temporary emphasis on that, but around 2017, the social justice ideology, if you really examine what it is, and then this idea of growth mindset, they are counterproductive to each other. And I have noticed that this idea of growth mindset and how popular that was years ago has really kind of died down in favor of this new ideology. So we are just kind of moving people along, and not giving them the education that they need.
Yeah, I mean, again, like, I always, you put the effort in, you do well. Okay, I don't have kids, but I had nephews and nieces, and they're trying to do something, and they're really trying hard. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you don't succeed, but you tried really well. It's, you can reward them for that, and you can say, you tried really well. You didn't succeed, but what did you do wrong? Where, what could you have done better? Or just, I mean, even if it's just building a Lego set or something, right? It's
Right. And if those are good practices to keep, a school year is just a 9-month snapshot in a human being's whole entire life. So if we can learn some of these, I heard you mention, use the example of like third grade, somebody going from D's at the beginning of the year to B's at the next year. So maybe when they're a fourth grader, they start out making B's, right? And then they keep progressing, and not only are their marks good, but they have a deep interest in learning. They have a deep interest in developing their character, developing their personality, developing hobbies and skills. That they become this ultimately a self-actualized unique individual.
yeah. On the education thing, I'm just curious, and I know you can't answer that because you got a country of 330 million people, and it's, state to state it's different. But okay, when I was a kid, again, I don't know if it's a budgetary thing, but in high school we had wood shop. Our high school, just before I got there, they used to have an auto shop. They didn't have that anymore. But even things like home ec, and we had an AV club where you could learn how to, we had to make a claymation movie and things like that. But these were, you had your core courses, and these were, you took an elective every year. So, you can take woodshop, or you could take home ec, or you could take the AV club, things like that. Like, how much of that has gone away in schools?
Uh, I It's hard to say. I will say that I through STEM and through some other, but also now in the past like 1 year, STEM is now coming under attack.
Yeah.
But I had the honor of teaching at a technical high school. I taught at a school. Shout out to Trimble Tech. It was an inner city high school, so we had a lot of, there were like 13 other schools in the city, and Trimble Tech was one that students had to apply to get in. And every student that came, there was a major, wood shop, auto shop. We had a lot of different programs. There was medical work, pharmacy tech, all kinds of certifications that kids could get. So I think in a lot of maybe our larger cities, there are some specialized schools, and where there's multiple high schools, there are becoming some of these specialized schools. But what was interesting, so I left there in 2009, and I remember that the rubric, our admissions rubric, was kind of under attack. Uh, they started to, because we were strictly, students' grades and behave, you had to apply to get in, and that was one of the beauties of it. And then towards in 2009, 2010, 2008, even, they really started kind of this war on meritocracy that we're sensing now with a lot of these schools. I noticed that started way back in 2009. So to answer your question, there is a a push to some of those schools and trainings. But then again, the past couple of years, I know that STEM is now somewhat under attack with the social justice ideology. So I don't know if those are still being pushed or not.
I don't know. I noticed. I don't want to give it, but I think around 2015 or 16, I started noticing they went from, some people started going from talking about STEM to start talking about STEAM, and they included
Hmm.
arts in there. Which, I mean, okay, there's nothing wrong with arts. Like, nothing wrong with fine arts. There's nothing wrong with writing. Like, these are, I shouldn't say they're like, these are also viable things, but to mix that in with, science and tech,
Hmm.
I think that was a mistake. I mean, look, okay, you need creativity to be a scientist. I mean, you have to want to look at how, problems in different ways. But I can understand to make like a well-rounded person. Okay, you're just in a very technical field. Okay, you take something to take your mind off it, like learn a musical instrument, learn to paint, learn to draw, write poetry or whatever. I can understand the benefit of that, but I don't know. Am I just making too much of that? Like adding changing STEM to STEAM, or is that
It it does seem interesting. I don't. I get the idea of a well-rounded person, but
yeah.
I also believe that somebody that is in a vibrant STEM program,
Mhm.
that if they wanted to pursue some sort of art, then they could also do that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like it's not a either or situation, but I wonder if bringing in the arts kind of waters down the science.
Yeah. Um,
And I'm sure people could have a 3 hour conversation about that particular question. And I don't take a side,
yeah.
but it definitely makes me wonder.
And like I said, okay, I'm not a very artistic person. I have trouble drawing stick man, like type of thing.
Mm,
But I get that. Like we had an art class. I took it, learned how to do pottery and stuff. I mean, I did. Like I said again, I was not very good at it, but it was just okay. If you can get kids to try all kinds of different things, especially when they're middle school and things like that, and yeah, they might find something they like and they can go work at it, right? But
hmm.
this forcing of it is what you know. Like I hated being forced to do anything as a kid. I hate being forced to do something right now. So like I said, I like the fact that we had those all. I think I can't remember if they call them electives or option classes. So yeah, I took woodworking. I took that art class. I took like I said, visual, like the audio visual stuff. Those are things that just kind of interested me. So I just went and took them. But yeah, like forcing that on kids, I just find that okay. Obviously, I have to force the reading, writing, arithmetic on them because they need that.
Right.
But
Yes.
but all the other stuff, like I just don't see how forcing a kid to go into an art class when that kid is not going to like it is a good thing. Like, I mean, let's leave the finger painting in kindergarten aside for a moment because that's different.
Hmm.
Like that's they're really young. But I'm talking about like middle school and high school. Like I think, do we not give kids enough choice? Like, do we not give kids enough credit for saying what they're going to take, or are we just letting kids or like
That's a that's an interesting question. I think that there are some choices, especially when you get up into the high school level. But then again, at the same time, uh, if ultimately the purpose of an education is to completely develop an individual, then I do think it is the system's responsibility to expose that child to different things throughout their career. You can kind of attribute it to making your child try vegetables. They may not like it, but this is good for them, and they may end up flourishing. A child may say, I don't want to take that theater class, or I got stuck in this theater class, blah blah blah. They do a play, they turn out like, oh my gosh, this is something that I really enjoy. And then they find, through that experience, they find something that became an integral part of who they are. But then again, you also get people put in a situation and they have horrible times.
yeah.
So I do believe that it's actually the responsibility of the education system to allow for autonomy and choice as well,
Mhm.
but also to make very, very clear and specific what the mandates are. And right now, I do have a lot of issue with some of the mandates and ideas that are being forced on children. Right now, my main concern is that we're forcing a worldview and we're forcing a particular narrative on kids, and it's not necessarily just subjects and things that they can choose, but society is actually forcing a whole entire way of viewing the world.
Yeah, I mean, okay, like I've been looking at some of this stuff and the anti-CRT laws. I don't want to get into but okay, like take Huck Finn. Like I was joking around with someone about this the other day. So you take the book Huck Finn. Now I think it's a good book. I'm not saying all kids should read it, but I think if a high school wanted to teach that or a middle school wanted to teach that, I think it's a very good book for kids to read. You know, get an idea of what the thinking and everything was back then. Now you could teach that, in the classical sense, right? So, you can talk about, and okay, so I'm going to get some of this wrong because it's been a long time since I read Huck Finn. Like, but at the end, when Huck hears Jim crying and wanting for his family, and then he's like, oh well, he's just like me. He misses his family like I would miss mine. She's a common humanity, and lets Jim go. And you can talk about, I kind of equated that to, that was Twain saying, okay, you know what? America's in its adolescence. They're coming of age. They realize they did something wrong and they're letting people go free. That's kind of how I had that in my head. Now you could have, quote unquote, a woke teacher who takes that and says, well, here's Huck, exploiting Jim's emotional labor and making himself out to be a white savior. Now you can take a book like Huck Finn and you could totally pervert the meaning of it.
Right.
So it's, there is a question of what you're teaching, but there's also a question of how you're teaching it.
There is that question of how you're teaching it. And, I heard, using a couple of expressions that you said, woke teacher and then common humanity. My experience with woke teachers and woke educators is that they have strong visceral reactions to that phrase common humanity. Okay. Like, will have strong emotional reactions to where they just have a hard time accepting that, that we do have a common humanity. We, as a species, we have a shared history, so there's something in the ethos that whenever we present the idea that we are a shared species, we have different cultures and different languages and different habits, and those are all beautiful, but we do have a shared history. And ultimately the facts at the moment in that book were that Huck saw Jim as he was able to see himself. So that goes back to what I was saying earlier. Whenever we can see somebody as we see ourselves, we are unable to do that person harm. We're just unable. So Huck, he was like, "Oh, you have to go. I can't do this anymore." So that's the power to that, and that's one of those liberalism ideas of seeing each other as we see ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, okay, like again, like I said, I don't have kids or anything, and I look at this from a very, very selfish point of view in some way. Like it's, when I retire, like we have socialized healthcare in Canada, government pensions and this, like your Social Security or whatever. When I retire, I want the people, like I want my doctors to be well educated. I want the people handling, the pension, the government pension funds to know what they're doing. So I'm looking at this from a very selfish point of view. I want the people who are doing the financing to know that 2 + 2 does not equal 5. So, like, shouldn't more people be up in arms about? I mean, I'm following a lot of parents and I'm seeing a lot of this stuff. And I mean, like, isn't the whole point of an education to prepare that? Like, don't you want well-educated citizens who will contribute well to society instead of someone who's just there looking for fault in everything? Like, when you can find fault in the word master bedroom, I mean, where are we going? And I saw something yesterday, someone complaining that the reason that the asphalt is black is because it can continuously let black people know that they're always being driven over. I'm like, how do you come up with that?
You're woke.
Yeah, I know. It's,
You- well, I let me see. I wanted to go like so many different places, but let me start here. So the fact that A, you're in Canada, B, I'm in Texas, you know, you come from an Islamic background, I come from a Christian background. So we're really at what society would like. Why are you guys talking? What is your interest in this? So the fact that we are concerned about, Western civilization, because the idea that you had of a competent and a character based society, that's what you think we would want. You would think that to me, that's an idea that once it was discovered, like, oh, this is the way to do it. You create systems based off of competence, and you create systems based off of character, and you reward people for their work, you reward people for their efforts, and you allow people this ability to pursue their life.
yeah. I mean, I like I said, some of these
but
things.
but now we're not. And I don't believe that everybody realizes that the ideology that what we're pushing forward now is not a continuation of that idea, but it's the complete opposite of that idea, and it's purposed to destroy that society that builds its systems upon competence and character. So hopefully that there will be enough people to say, hey, stop. Because if this moves, let's say, if another 10 years in the culture, then those people that were educated under that worldview and that system and were not pushed to develop themselves,
Mhm.
they'll be the ones that are in charge of the system. And they're building a system based off of always, talking about the asphalt, like you've said, and always finding finding the problem, because the critical social justice worldview is to constantly see, point out, talk about the problem, because in their mind the problem is always present and it's always been present. So we're going to talk about that, and then we're going to just dream of utopia.
Hey, again, with like the whole thing around I don't want to get into the whole thing around the CRT anti-CRT bills, but anything like that, people talking about school choice, homeschooling. Well, I'm like, all of this are stopgap measures. If you don't
Mm-hmm.
fix the academy, if you don't fix the colleges of education, if all you're churning out are teachers who think in this one way, if a neighborhood wants to get together, and get a little pod school for their neighborhood so the kids can have something a little bit more local and fixed more on what those neighborhood kids need. If your only choice is what's coming out of the colleges of education, there's a problem here. So I mean, like, I think a lot of people think of, okay, we just got to get school choice and it's going to be fixed. It's like, no, there's something behind that. There's that there. I mean, I think it's Illinois, Washington, um, Idaho, which is weird because I think they had one of the best bills, the anti-CRT bills, because it was just a reaffirmation of civil rights.
Mm-hmm.
They are requiring, diversity training as part of the teacher certificates. So like, I'm just like, okay, we've got, it's like the K through 12. That's one aspect of it, but there's so much
Yeah.
other stuff that, I mean, it
It's
sometimes,
the educator training,
yeah,
like you mentioned, the educator training, and that's why. So with Empowered Pathways, what we're really focusing on right now is professional learning and professional development, and working primarily with adults, and with the educators, because that's where the need is.
yeah. I mean, I just, like I said, like, you can fix this for the moment, but until you fix that source, you're not going to get things are just going to keep getting worse and worse. I mean, I think another thing that was really bad is around the time I was graduating high school. So I was, I graduated in '87. Um, they just started the push for college, and in Quebec it works
Mm,
slightly different than the rest of Canada. High school goes up to grade 11. Then we have this thing called CEGEP, which is kind of like a junior college, and then you go on to do your bachelor's. So instead of going to grade 12 and then 4 years for your bachelor's, you go to grade 11. You take CEGEP for 2 years, and then you go do 3 years for your bachelor's. So it's the same amount of time, just broken up slightly differently. Now in the CEGEP field, you had two streams. You had a pre-college stream or a pre-university stream, and then you had a technical stream. So the technical stream was a 3-year program, and you could take like chemical engineering or electrical engineering. You had radiography techs, like all kinds of different technical fields. But it was always the go to university, go to university, go to university. But I'm like, okay, you know what? Like I'd mentioned woodshop. Like I liked woodshop, but you can teach a kid math while you're teaching them woodshop in some respects, right?
absolutely. Yeah.
Angles, measurements, counting things off. So when did that, like I said, I saw it around the like the late 80s, like 86, 87, when I was getting ready to graduate. That's the student counselors and all that come in, they just start pushing all that. Where did it go from? Being a plumber is an honorable profession. Being a mechanic, like there's nothing wrong. Like, where did it go from? Okay, well, those are low professions. I mean, you need your car, like you need.
Right. Right. Yeah. So I remember, and one thing. So I'm in Texas, and there's always been a strong contingency of people, that value the trades and see that those are A, honorable professions, and B, high paying professions.
Mhm.
But I do remember around the early 2000s a huge push that everybody goes to college. Somewhere around the early 2000s, like it was. I started teaching in 2000, and then so maybe about '03, '04, a few years later, just a huge net industry push. Everybody goes to college. Everybody goes to college. So there was that moment in the early to mid 2000s of everybody goes to college, and less emphasizing some of the technical professions. Now, what's interesting is that push everybody goes to college in the early 2000s. We now know that those were the people that were A, heavily indoctrinated, and B, financially crippled by paying that much to be indoctrinated. And now these are the adults that are in charge, uh, tearing down the system.
Okay, I mean that's another thing. Like with the college stuff, like hearing about Harvard with what's going on with the Asian kids and all that. Like, I don't think you're doing anyone any favor by boosting up their SAT scores to get them into college. You know,
Hmm.
Again, like I said, if and I'm not a policymaker, but I always thought, okay, so if you had a kid who throughout his high school career, you saw that improvement, you saw them getting better and better and better, saw them, so they might not have reached the marks they need to get into Harvard, let's just say, but they could do really well in a local community college or whatever. But if that kid's got his heart, they got their heart set on going to Harvard, and you know, instead of Harvard lowering the standards for that child or that kid at that point, they're no longer a child. They could say, okay, you know what? We like you. We like your improvement, but you're just not quite ready. If you did a year to prep and take, like if you're going into whatever law, right? You do a year, you take these courses, you study these things, or you're going into med school. Okay, you got to, you need to bone up on your biology. If they gave them a year to prep and gave them those skills, so that what, you've got a place ready for you, waiting for you the following year, but just do
Hmm.
this and get like a B average or something. I don't know, like set some metrics for them. Like, wouldn't that be a better way than just saying, okay, you know what, we like you, we need you because you're brown, black, whatever, you're a woman, uh, you know like.
It would be a better way if you are trying to build a society, that is that builds its hierarchies
Yeah.
on competence and character. But if you're trying to build a society, and put people in jobs and then do everything to where competence and character don't matter, then you just reward people for reward or punish people for the traits they were born with.
I mean, like again, like I just see that. Like I'd spoken to, uh, he's I think he's finishing his physics degree right now, and he was saying, I think I'm just going to get out of school because it's it's a he's another guy named Eric's young black man, and he was just like, yeah, I don't want to be a diversity hire. I don't want to be I don't want to be told this all the time, but if let's just say he was put into that in the physics department because he was only black and he wasn't qualified, and either A, you're going to flunk out and just not go back to school, or let's say you switch from that to whatever African American studies or gender studies or something, and you're told that this was because the white man oppressed you. I mean, right away, that's that's okay. That's why you didn't do well. It's not letting people take responsibility for themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that my hope is that once people are in these situations and they're thinking like, hey, wait a minute, that people can realize like, oh, there's this postmodern neo-Marxist worldview, and then there's the liberal worldview that Western society has been operating under for the past 300 years. I'm going to unhinge myself from these bad ideas, and I'm going to return back to here. Because if we can begin building our systems based off of these things again, and just unhook from the bad ideas.
Yeah, again, I don't know. Like I'm looking at this stuff and I'm like, okay, a little off far afield. A friend of mine runs this organization called Ideas Beyond Borders, and what Ideas Beyond Borders does is he's a refugee from Iraq. He grew up under Saddam. He became a U.S. citizen last year.
Okay.
It was last year, or the year before. But anyways, he's recently became a U.S. citizen. And what Ideas Beyond Borders does is they translate books on science and philosophy, and they make them available for free in the Middle East. So he translates them into Arabic, Kurdish, and Farsi now. And they just put them up on their website, and people can have them for free. So people like Steven Pinker said you could take all my books and do them. I think Sam Harris did something similar, and so. And then during COVID, they were doing a lot of work on COVID and things like that. But he was telling me that he put out a call for translators in Iraq because he wanted local people. And so in the first day, you got 15,000 applications.
Wow.
Now I'm looking at that. I'm like, you know what? They want this stuff, and we're just pissing it away.
We are. And I'm sure you got to this point, but to where you just get hungry for knowledge, to where things just got so stale and so bogged down, and you figured out that this idea is just that the bottom of it is just destruction, and that's all it is. Then you want to get back into the classics. I started rereading some of the Stoic philosophers and just really getting into reading some John Locke and reading those things that excite and invigorate us and inspire us to be that free individual. Like the people that you were just talking about, they wanted that. So as I feel that there's something within us that makes us crave knowledge and crave understanding and find meaning making in our world.
Yeah, I mean, like when you're talking about going back to the classics, is when I got back from overseas and I started seeing all this stuff, and okay, I read all the Enlightenment thinkers. I did a poli-sci degree. I like Milton, Mill, Hume, Locke, all that. But that was back in the late '80s, early '90s. So it was a while ago, and I was just like, okay, all right, go back. So yeah, when I came back in 2014, I reread all that. I mean, okay, I don't want to say I read everything. I read Milton and Mill again, and I read Locke and Payne. I read some Hume. I just wanted to go back and look at those ideas again to make sure that this is what I'm doing. And then I started reading all the critical race theory stuff. Like, I spent, I think I warped my mind. I spent like 18 months reading almost nothing but, oh no, it was just, once I started reading it, like I started with white fragility and I just figured, okay, I'll just read this book and this should give me a good idea. And I'm like, I was reading it. I was like, where the hell did this come from? And then I went back and I started with Derek Bell and, worked my way all the way down. I read all kinds of bizarre papers and, okay, take someone like Derek Bell, like the guy, Bell wasn't stupid. Bell was not, he was an intelligent person. He's writing legal cases. And I can see where his frustration was, like, especially the first paper I read by him, Serving Two Masters. And he talks about how, education shouldn't have, it wasn't schools that should have been desegregated. It should have been education that was desegregated, which, yes, if you think about that, it would have been much better to fix the broken schools than to bus kids for, an hour in each direction.
Right.
Or, I mean, another thing that I found out recently that happened was the Rosenwald schools. They were all shut down because they were black schools, and because of Brown versus the Board of Education, you can't have segregated schools anymore. And these were some of the best performing schools in the country. And it was like, okay, you did yourself a huge disservice there. So, I mean, I get the frustration and I get where that comes from, but it was just like, it's like you got 4 good cornerstones for your foundation, but then what you're laying is like watered down cement. So nothing proper can grow on it.
Right. Well, and also, Bell and Crenshaw, they all attribute, and even D'Angelo, they all attribute the Frankfurt School scholars. They all attribute, and even Marx. Yeah. So you would kind of have to think that they understand that they are pushing the oppressor versus the oppressed narrative in hopes of overthrowing a free capitalist society. So you have to think that somewhere within their intention is that they know they are fueling this chaos and this division with a political agenda in mind.
Yeah. Look, I don't want to keep you too much longer. It's been great talking to you. If you want to give a last sales pitch for, empowering ed, empowered pathways. We were talking about that before, or your way of doing things or advice to parents, please go ahead.
Okay. For sure. So in Empowered Pathways, we are promoting a humanity-centered social and emotional learning. We are offering humanity-centered ways of looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion. And essentially, you can look at the website. The Compassionate Humanism Framework is all there for free to look at. And essentially what we are promoting is, we talked about human dignity a bit, what centering dignity means. And then building upon that is developing mindsets of inquiry and compassion rather than developing mindsets of fear and judgment. And there's also a tool on the website for that. And then also promoting 3 pathways of practice. And the pathways of practice are practices that build awareness and equanimity for self and others. So we really focus on self-awareness, some mindfulness practices, metacognition practices, and then practices that build kindness and compassion for self and others. And then finally, practices that celebrate our common humanity and break the walls of indignity. The overall idea is that by engaging in those practices constantly throughout our day, throughout our year, throughout our life, then we're actually cultivating the neural pathways that lead to peace and resilience.
Okay, great. Well, thanks a lot. And again, sorry, I should ask if you want to just let people know where they can get a hold of you.
For sure. Contact at empoweredpathways.org. You can follow me on Twitter at Jason with 2 E's Human.
Okay. I'll put all that in the description. Well, Perfect. Again, thank you very much, Jason. It was great talking with you.
Great talking with you as well. Thank you for having me.
And thanks everyone for listening, and I'll be back.